Hi everybody, my name is Nick and I'm a software engineer here at CloudSpace. This talk is an introduction to AngularJS. Here at CloudSpace we use AngularJS to power our front-end web apps. It's a great framework and it's got a lot of really neat features that I'm really excited about, and hopefully by the end of this talk you'll also be excited. So you may be wondering, what is Angular? And at a very high level, Angular is a JavaScript framework for web apps. Angular was written by Google, and if you were to ask them, they were to say that it is HTML if it had been designed for web applications. HTML, as it was designed, is great for static documents, and it kind of breaks down when you get to things like dynamic content that we see in a lot of web apps today. You may have used some other frameworks that are MVC or MVVW, things like that. This is MVW, it's Model View Whatever, where whatever stands for whatever works for you. Let's see. So the first thing I want to do is sort of go over some of the main tenets of Angular and some of the cool features that you get. So the first D of Angular is directives. Directives are essentially extensions to HTML. If you've ever seen any Angular source code, I'm not really sure who has seen Angular source code in the room, but if you ever have, you've probably noticed things that are like ngModel, ngClick, ngRepeat. Those are all examples of directives that Angular gives you straight off the bat. The second D is data binding. And data binding essentially means that as you change things in the view, your variables in your controller, your scope, they automatically update without you having to do anything. So there's no event listeners or anything like that. The next one is dependency injection. And really all dependency injection serves to do is keep your app modular. It's more easily tested, it's easier to refactor. Next we have declarative views. One of the core tenets of Angular is that interfaces should be declarative. Your views should describe what components you want to see, not how those components actually work. So HTML by itself is declarative. And so Angular sort of keeps that going. Basically, your views are just HTML. And the last one is directives. Hold for laughter. So I want to go a little bit more into some of these features. And the first one I want to show you is kind of the hello world of AngularJS. And this is data binding. So this is a really basic Angular source code. And you can see I'm initializing ng-app to nothing. Basically, this is just a marker telling Angular that we want to use Angular. I'm setting ng-controller to bind control. That's not completely necessary, and I'm not going to talk about it. And next is the actual important bit, and it's ngModel. So what I'm doing is I'm using the ngModel directive to name a variable on my controller scope, and I'm naming it username. Later in the view, I can reference that using these double curly braces as username. So I want to show you some of the source code for this. This is essentially the exact same source code. I've just put a little extra visuals into it using Bootstrap and things like that. You can see we still have that ngModel, and we still have that same hello curly braces username. So let me show you what this does. So this is I just showed you the source code that powers this page. And as you can see, I've got an input box that is labeled with username, and below that it says hello. So we've set up our data binding such that if I were to start typing, you can see it automatically updates on the screen. We didn't have to do any event listeners, we didn't have to do any DOM updates, it's just automatically there. This is one of the most powerful features of Angular, and it's one of my favorite parts. So that was a pretty simple example. I want to show you a little bit more of what you can do with directives, specifically all of the directives that are built into Angular itself. And this one's a little bit more complicated. So instead of going over the source code first, I want to show you kind of what this actually looks like when we put it on the screen. So this is the full source code of the page that I'm about to show you. This is the slide you just saw, and this is just a little bit of extra output. So this is that page, and you can see we have this sort of component here that we call slide replace. And essentially, when you click on this component, it slides over and it reveals two inputs. We're actually using these components on a project we're working on now. And what this is for is collecting OAuth access keys and secret keys. So the user comes in, he sees Facebook, he clicks on Facebook, and has access to these two elements that he can type in. And it works exactly the same like the previous example, where if I were to type Facebook secret here, it automatically updates below. And the same with that one. So let's kind of go over the code line by line, and I can show you how this all works. So the first thing is it's wrapped in this slide replace class. That kind of contains the whole widget and is used for CSS. The next we have this pane class, and we have this is the first Angular in this little widget, and it's using a directive called ngClass. Essentially what ngClass does is it adds or removes class based on some sort of input. In our case, we're saying we want to add the reveal class if show evaluates to true. And because we haven't initially set up anything, it's undefined in JavaScript, which evaluates to false. So initially, there is no reveal class on this div pane. So the next two parts are these two blocks here. We have the initial block, which is basically what you see when you first load the page. And all it is an image pointing at Facebook, which I have on my server. The next one is we have this replacement div, which essentially slides in once you click on the initial div. And that's just this image and these two inputs here. So now we have this ngClick, and all ngClick does is setting show to true. And once you click it, it automatically updates. And now that show is true, we automatically add this reveal class to our pane div. And what that does is there's CSS rules that if show is on the pane, then we'll CSS transition everything to the left and animate automatically. And if we ever want to go back, we have this ngClick setting show to false on the smaller image. And then, of course, we have the two inputs, both having an ng model of Facebook access and Facebook secret, so that we can access those variables later. So again, this is essentially the same code that we just looked at. It's got a few extra elements for Bootstrap, and I've also added this block which outputs the variables to the view that we've just taken in on the two inputs. So you can see sort of the power of what you can do without even writing any JavaScript. So far I've written no JavaScript. This is all HTML. It's all completely declarative. I haven't had to open up a JS file or include a script tag or anything. The only thing I've had to include was some Bootstrap stuff and my AngularJS include. So that's all well and good. You've got this cool little component. So you've made this component, you have Facebook, you're getting OAuth. Now say you want to do Twitter. The easy way to do that is just come in here, copy this whole block, and everywhere it says Facebook, change it to Twitter, and then you've got two new variables on your scope called Twitter access and Twitter secret. That's not very dry. You're reusing a lot of code, you're chaining together a lot of the same Angular directives. So luckily, Angular provides you a way to sort of componentize all of your widgets, and it's called custom directives. You can create your own custom directives, which again are extensions to HTML. So you can create your own custom HTML tags, you can create your own custom attributes on existing HTML tags. It's a very powerful way for you to customize HTML and add your components in a way that makes it easy to add in other places. So I'm going to go to the next example, and it's the exact same thing. Let me switch slides here. So this is essentially what we're trying to get. We want to change all of this code and boil it down so that we can create new ones that are genericized so that we have this new code to call it. You can see that we've named it CSP slide replace, and CSP is essentially a prefix. So if you notice, all the Angular directives have a prefix of ng. Here at CloudSpace we use CSP for ours. You always add a prefix. It's best practice, mostly because if HTML were ever to implement a new tag name or something like that, you don't want any conflicts for in the future. So it's always just best practice to have a small prefix before all of your directives. So I'm going to show you a little bit of how we can achieve this. Okay, so this is the first time we've had to write any JavaScript. I know a lot of people hate JavaScript, so sorry. It's not that much, 13 lines. I'd like to go over line by line and sort of explain everything and how it works. Let's see. Here we go. All right, so our first line is angular.module intro app. And what this is essentially doing is initializing a new Angular module that we're naming intro app. The next thing we're doing is attaching a directive to that module that we've just initialized. We name our directive CSP slide replace, and that allows us to reference it later in the view. Sorry. So what this is essentially doing is returning an object literal that is the config of the directive. So I'll go over that line by line as well. Line 4 here, you can see we're setting restrict to a string with the capital letter E. This is sort of Angular's way of limiting how you can invoke this directive. In this case, we're saying we want to limit it to be invoked as an element. There's also attribute or class. So if we wanted to limit this to be an element or an attribute on an element, it would look like this. So E for element, A for attribute. But we just want to limit to an element right now. That's pretty much covers all of our bases, and we don't care too much to being able to call it in different custom ways. The next line is simply a string, which is a link to an external template, which is going to house the view for our directive. In our case, I'm just serving that from a static file, templates, CSP slide replace.html. This next block is a little bit trickier. Scope is sort of a way to set up an isolate scope within your directive, and it's a way that you can pass information into your views so that your scope has access to the outside world. In our case, we want to pass in 4 things. We want to pass in the name. So an example of that would be Facebook or Twitter. We also want to pass in a path to the logo, which is the large image that the user initially sees when they load the page. Finally, we want to pass in the icon, which is again just a path to the small image. And those are all passed in as strings, which is indicated with this @ symbol. The final one is we're a little bit more complicated, and it's named service, and essentially what you're saying is that you want to set up a two-way data bind between your controller scope and your directive scope, and that's indicated by this equal sign. So I'll sort of show, this is a little bit better explanation. What we're essentially saying is that the service variable within my directive scope should equate to the Facebook variable within my controller scope. And it will automatically two-way bind those so that if your service variable in your directive scope changes, the Facebook variable in your controller scope automatically changes as well. So this is the HTML for that. This is the view. It looks very similar to the widget that we had before, except we've replaced everything that specified it as a Facebook widget with something a little bit more abstracted. So we've replaced the path to the first with the reference to logo, which is a string that we've passed in. We've replaced the path to the second image, which is the smaller one, with icon, which is again a string we've passed in. And we've replaced both instances of the Facebook string with name. The last and most important thing is setting this ng model. We're now setting it to service.access and service.secret instead of Facebook access and Facebook secret. And again, service is automatically two-way bound to whatever it is you pass in on the scope. So again, this is the exact same functionality that we've had before, except now it's a lot more modular. This still works. Everything still works, except now we can add a new one relatively easily. So let's say we wanted to add a Twitter slide replace. We would basically take this directive, name it Twitter instead of Facebook, change the paths to these 2 images, and bind the service to Twitter. So this is our output. These 2 boxes down here, Facebook access key and Facebook secret key. So we also want an output for Twitter as well. So again, we can just take this, which is not in a directive, and we can change this to Twitter output and Twitter secret. You wouldn't necessarily want to output your access key and secret key to the user, but this is just sort of an example of what that might look like. And now, since we've bound the service of the second directive to Twitter, we can reference the second directive service as Twitter here. So if we save this and reload the page, we now have a second directive, that's Twitter, which has its own scope and will update the proper variables correctly. So that's pretty much it. So now that we have this modular directive, we can reuse this wherever we want, anywhere in our app, simply by calling this CSP slide replace component that we've created. All right, so that's custom directives. That's pretty much all I have for you today. Again, this is just a basic intro to what you can sort of learn and do with Angular. I know Kalen has a talk about Angular that he's going to be doing a little bit later, actually right after this one. Again, my name is Thomson. I'm an engineer at CloudSpace, and thank you.